Hope everyone's well today. Just show you these ducks. Look at these fellas here, just standing on that frozen bit of ice there. And there's their mates just having a swim under the bridge in a part of the canal that's not frozen. So today I'm going to do a video on one of my favourite topics, which isn't ducks, although I've got nothing against ducks, quite like them. But it is the weather. There's back to me again. Canal. So the canal, this is the Leeds-Liverpool canal. I'm filming this in Lydiate where I live. And as you can see, it's frozen. Hopefully you can see anyway. And I was hoping to be able to do a video on one of my favourite topics, the weather. But to film it on a day where we've got some unusual weather, such as today. And in the way that only in December, January and February that you can get these days, with deep blue skies as a result of very cold Arctic air, a low sun just angled there, just coming through the trees there, casting the shadows on that field, and the air is very cold. The visibility is absolutely perfect, and we've got a frozen landscape, which is relatively not unusual, but it's not very common. So yeah, the weather, I've always been really interested in the weather. I am a bit of a weather nerd, to be honest with you. I always have been. And I thought, because it is a bit of a British peculiarity, isn't it, talking about the weather? It's very true. You know, if you hear people say, oh, you know, British people, the first thing they talk about is the weather. It's true. It's used almost as part of a greeting instead of how are you. It's, oh, isn't it cold today, or rain's coming later. It's true. We do talk about the weather, and I think that's always been the case, you know, which is, so I've often asked myself the question, why is that? I'll try and answer it now. There's a lovely dog. Hello there. Hi, are you okay? Hello. And I think the reason for it is because what we've got today is, you know, relatively unusual weather. Cold, you know, there's been a very light sprinkling of snow. The canal's frozen, but usually the climate that we have in the UK is changeable, so it's different every day. Usually, obviously, we have spells where we have a dominant weather pattern that can stay around for days or weeks, but it's kind of, you know, all 4 seasons in one day at any time of the year. Lots of rain interspersed with lots of sun. You know, it's windy regularly as well, and then you can get days where you've got frost, a little bit of snow, so a little bit of everything. We don't generally get extremes of weather in the UK, although we can do. But I think that's the reason why people talk about the weather, is because of its sheer variability. In other parts of the world where they have a climate that's dominated by one particular weather pattern, you know, the locals aren't going to talk about the weather as much because they know what to expect. Every day is going to be very similar. You know, in southern Spain, it's going to be hot and dry for, you know, 7-8 months of the year. In other parts of the world, you know, the frozen tundra in Canada, Russia, you know what to expect, and so it goes. So I think that's the reason why. But something, again, another thing, the peculiarity is how, just something that I've observed is, yeah, British people talk about the weather a lot, but they also, many of them will tend to think that if we have a day with sunshine and showers, so it can be sunny one minute, rain in the next, sunny the next, rain in the next, that's in some way unusual, when it's really not. That is kind of the norm because of our, you know, Atlantic dominated, temperate, mild temperate oceanic climate, which lends itself to sun interspersed with rain, with wind, sun, rain, wind, etc. That variability on a day-to-day basis. So it's not abnormal, it's normal. This is more unusual, this type of weather. So a little bit more on the weather, and well, let me know what you think of my observations so far. I don't know whether this interests anybody, but it interests me. So it's my channel, isn't it? So I'm going to talk about it. No, I'm only joking. I hope you find this interesting on some level. So what else? Well, did you know that the oldest temperature record in existence is the Central England temperature data series, which dates back to 1659. Most other places around the world, their weather records are between 100 to 150 years old. But the Central England temperature data series, which is the measurement used to record temperatures and monitor climate in England, is the oldest in the world. So there's a little fact for you. I've always been interested in the weather, as I say, when I was from when I was a young boy. And when I was young, you know, before the internet, etc., I used to, well, I'd have books where I'd read about the weather, you know, fact books, and read about different climates around the world. I was interested in severe weather phenomena, etc. But I also used to be really excited, you know, every day I'd get my I'd have a look in my dad's paper, and on page 2 there would be the weather records from the day before, just in a little corner at the bottom of the page, as well as the forecast for that day. And I used to look, and I'd go through all they'd have a table of various different cities, prominent cities around the world, and what the weather was the day before, the type of weather and the temperature. And I used to love it, you know, every single day. That would be a routine for me, and it'd always be exciting for me if the weather forecast, or we were in the middle of a spell of weather that was out the ordinary, you know, that was unusual or exceptional. And then I don't know if anyone, well, you will remember teletext. I think it was it CFAX, was it called, I think, you know, the teletext anyway. And I'd look on there at the weather, and they used to have a forecast for the 5 days ahead. So again, this was the days before the internet. This is going up to and including, say, the late 90s, before I could find more, you know, interesting weather sources online. And I'd go on and I'd look at the forecast for 5 days ahead. Again, this might seem pretty boring to a lot of people, but I do love the weather. My dream holiday would be to go tornado chasing in Tornado Alley in the US, which is a stretch of states that runs from down the Midwest into the deep south, into the deep south, between the Rockies in the west and the Appalachian Mountains in the east. I've been to that part of the world before, but I'd love to go in tornado chasing season, which is April to June. That'll be my dream holiday, and hopefully I'll be able to do that one day and actually see a tornado. But I have seen a tornado. The most incredible thing I've ever seen in my life was a tornado. Now, it wasn't in America, it wasn't a super tornado, it was only a small one. But I saw it in a place called Ormskirk, which is a market town about 5 miles from here in West Lancs. And I think it was around that time of the year. I think it might have been May, around about 2011, something like that, 2011, 2012. And there was a little mini tornado that actually made contact with the ground, so it was a tornado, you know. And it was probably about a quarter of a mile. I felt like I could almost touch it. And the way the atmosphere changed and the darkness that it brought, and then actually seeing it spinning, it was an incredible sight. It was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. And of course, that only whetted my appetite more, really, to one day go to America and see a massive, you know, F3, F4, F5 tornado, and, you know, hopefully not die. But what a way to go out if indeed that did happen, chasing a tornado. But the exhilaration and the and the just purely, yeah, it'd be so exhilarating for me to be driving across the Midwest chasing tornadoes, to see one. So what are my weather memories? Well, the deepest snow I've ever seen. It was unbelievable. It was in December 2010, which was the last sub-zero average month in the UK, which means that the average temperature recorded as part of that CET, Central England temperature data series I referred to before, actually came out negatively for the entire month, minus 0.7, which is incredibly rare. And I remember that month. And I remember one day and night in particular. It was December the 17th, 2010. And I was working at a university in Ormskirk, a place called Edgehill University. And we had our Christmas night out planned for the evening of Friday, December the 17th. Left work early, about 3:30, just as it started to snow. And over the next hour and a half, the snow piled in like I've never seen snowfall like it. I managed to get the last train into town, which I think was about 5:20 or something like that, into Liverpool, before the trains were cancelled. So I managed to make it to the venue for our work's Christmas do, which was in a casino, where, needless to say, I lost lost some money, but I had a really good night. And then the snow just continued to pile up, and it was heavy in Liverpool. And we somehow managed to get a lift back, get a taxi back, and he somehow managed to get us back through the snow. I don't know how, because I remember just how deep it was by the time we got back home. It was about a foot deep, about a level foot deep, maybe even more. Never seen snow like that before or since. It was crazy, and it hung around for about 10 days after that. So we had a winter wonderland over Christmas that year. It didn't snow again, but it was really cold. I saw minus 13 on the car thermometer one day during that spell, which is incredible. And even more so, there was a temperature recorded of minus 17 at Crosby, which is a suburb of Liverpool, which is on the coast. Now that is absolutely unreal that you can get a temperature that low on the coast, but minus 17 degrees Celsius. Crazy. Anyway, back to said night out. Got a lift back on a taxi. By the taxi, a few people got dropped off along the way. I was the last one to get out, and the roads became impassable for the last mile. So I just said, drop me off here, I'll walk the rest of the way. And I was quite excited too, to be honest, to be walking, trudging through the snow. 3 in the morning, it was still snowing. I was half cut. I'd had a good night, and I was loving life because I had my snow. I'd had my night out. And I was walking home, there's hardly anybody about, and then I saw in the distance this lorry that was coming down the road really, really slowly, and I flagged him down, and it took him a while to stop because obviously it was really icy and treacherous, so he slowed his vehicle down. It took him a while, and he eventually came round to a halt, wound his window down. And he said, yeah, what is it, mate? I think he thought I was in trouble or something. And I said to him, oh, you haven't got a spare ciggy, have you? He wasn't too happy with me. I think he told me where to go, wound the window up and got on his way again. And then I went home. So that's the heaviest snow I remember. I also remember heavy snow when I was little, in the mid-80s. We had snow in 85, 86, 87. There were some snowy years there. And more recently, there was quite a well-known spell of weather in February 2018. It was coined the beast from the east, and the mainstream media usually talk a load of absolute nonsense about weather and climate, but they coined this term, beast from the east, which kind of stuck. An incredibly cold spell of weather for about 5 days at the end of February, beginning of March, so quite late in the season for such deep cold. This was in 2018. I remember I was on a little holiday with my girlfriend at the time, Sarah. It was so cold, and we had some snow, but I remember the depth of cold, how cold it was, bone-chillingly cold it was. I remember thinking then, there was this wind that was, call it a lazy wind, wind from the east that goes right through you. Again, these types of weather events are pretty rare in the UK because our climate's not oriented towards severe weather event. It's quite a mild, benign climate, but that was very, very cold. And but the coldest winters ever. So the year I was born, actually in 1982, the coldest temperature ever recorded in England and Scotland was in January 1982. Just watching my foot here, there's a few frozen puddles. January 1982, which was minus 26.1. So if you think how cold that is, that's how cold it can get with the right weather synoptics in England. Minus 26.1 centigrade in Newport, which I think is in Shropshire, and even colder, minus 27.2 in Braemar. I don't know whether that's how you pronounce it, Braemar, in the Highlands in Scotland. And a little quirk, that record cold temperature for the UK, which is minus 27.2, as I say, has been recorded twice in Braemar and once in Aboyne, I think, maybe in Aberdeenshire. That exact temperature, minus 27.2. Once in January 1982, once in December 1995, and once in February 1892. That exact same temperature. I would say probably with the right setup you could probably just about get minus 30 degrees in the UK, but that would be, I don't know, maybe once in a 1,000-year event. I don't know. We will see some very cold temperatures tonight, I think, in the Scottish Highlands. You know, most years you'll get below minus 10 somewhere. Sometimes you can get quite a bit colder than that. But famous cold winters, so just the winter of 1981-82. There was a very, very cold spell of weather in January 1987 that particularly affected southeast England. There were some places that didn't get above minus 7, minus 8 degrees for a couple of days, top temperature during the day. 1978, 1979, which was before my time, I can't remember it, but again, very severe winter. I think every month, December, January, February, was very cold there. But probably the most well-known ones, and if you're watching and you're old enough, can I say that, to remember either of these years, is 1947. So end of January, all of February, start of March 1947. Winter struck late, but boy did it strike, and it paralysed the country. You know, it was a very snowy as well as very cold spell, you know, affecting the UK, affecting, you know, coming at a time just after the end of the Second World War. You know, the country was still reeling from the effects of that. There was rationing in place, you know, people were traumatised, society was trying to put itself back together, and then that incredibly cold spell of weather, 1947, you know, snowdrifts 30 foot deep in some places, absolutely extremely cold and snowy. And then even colder, not quite as snowy, although there was a lot of snow, but colder and for a longer period of time. And this is the big one that people will remember, is 1962-63, so the cold set in on Boxing Day and carried on all the way into, didn't really break until early March. There was a couple of little milder spells, but generally speaking it was a freezing cold 3 months. I remember my dad, who's sadly no longer with us, he used to recall that winter, and I remember him saying that he went to the game at Goodison Park to watch Everton. I can't remember, did he say it was called off or not? I can't remember. Or did the undersoil heating mean the game would go ahead? But I always remember him saying that was the first day of the cold spell, was Boxing Day. I'll have to check whether Everton did actually play their game or not on that day. But he used to talk about that winter. And then obviously people of a certain age who've experienced these winters that I've already talked about, you know, Britain was a different place back then, I think. Even when I was younger, I think it was less given to hysteria and hyperbole, and I think there's a lot of truth in the opinion, really, that the people were a bit more stoic and kind of got on with things certainly the country and society was functioned better. I mean, I've seen today, I was out in the car before, a lot of roads that should have been gritted weren't gritted, even though this weather's been forecast. And I don't think you got all the nonsense whipped up by the media, and the scare tactics and the fear mongering and all the rest that goes with it, which is that's for a separate video really, I suppose. But yeah, I think sometimes you know, I think when I look back and and how I remember what things were even when I was a kid, you know, and when you see the hardships that this country's been through only, you know, relatively recently, obviously the war, and then these severe winters, and you do think, you know, if we got a winter like that, which we may well do this year, how will people cope? But that was 1962, 1963, which was the coldest winter of the 20th century, but not the coldest winter of all time. That was, I think, I might have the year wrong, but during the Little Ice Age, when frost fairs were held up on the Thames. It's got a twig there. You may have seen those frost fairs depicted in paintings talked about by Dickens, etc. Actually, I'd say talked about by Charles Dickens. That was in, obviously he was of the Victorian era, but there was another spell of cold winters as well, and I think in some of his works he refers to frost fairs on the Thames. Anyway, I think it was the late 1600s. I think the whole winter, I think that was the coldest winter the UK's ever had, you know, according to the Central England Temperature Data Series. And I think another cold winter was 1755. Another cold month was January 1940, which was, you recall me talking about the December 2010 that I remember before. I think it was about as cold as that. So if you can imagine, at a time when the country's at war and having to contend with that kind of weather, no central heating or anything like that, you know, for most people. So you can imagine how tough that must have been. So yeah, as I walk down the canal here, you can see it's still, probably should have showed you more. Anyway, there you go. I probably should have done this more so you could see this view. Hopefully you're still with me. I'm just walking, obviously still down the canal here, and what an absolutely amazing day this is. It's stunning, bracing, invigorating. The air is so clean, fresh. But as I say, our normal climate, you can see these fields here. So I think I've mentioned this before. So, you know, I live on the edge of what's called the West Lancashire Plain, which is quite a significant patch of land that is very flat. It runs all the way out to the Sefton coast, down to up to Preston in the north, down to where I live in the south, and across a few miles further east. And it's big farming country, as you can probably tell. So, you know, what's grown around here is a lot of root veg, wheat and barley, sugar beet, this kind of thing, loads of potatoes. And the reason again is it's really good fertile soil, and see this tree here, and a very benign, mild climate. Look at this. There's apples here, look at that. Wouldn't be able to eat those now, but there you go. There is a lot of fruit that grows alongside the canal. You do get the odd apple tree. You've got elderberries, blackberries, some raspberries. So that's always a nice thing to do, you know, between mid-July to early August, picking blackberries. They were really good this year. I got loads and froze quite a few to make something with them actually. So yeah, Anyway, I think that'll do. Hopefully it's been of some interest to you. You've at least enjoyed the scenery. Maybe you've enjoyed some of my weather tales and my musings. Maybe not. But leave a comment if you remember any of the winters or the events that I've talked about, what your experiences are, what your memories were, then let me know. And I will speak to you all very, very soon. Please subscribe if you haven't already. I would really appreciate it. Just click that button. It does help me. And thanks for watching. And I'll speak to you soon. Cheers.